Zorro is somewhat of a proto-superhero in the sense that when he was first invented in 1919, the term superhero hadn't been coined yet. Characters like Batman obviously came out of the tradition started by Zorro, a mysterious masked man who takes the law into his own hands, fights corruption, and helps those who can't help themselves. Famously, the movie Bruce Wayne and his parents saw on the night of their murder in the earliest Batman stories was the mark of Zorro, making this heroic figure literally part of his inspiration. What exactly a character needs to be considered a superhero is an argument that fans will continue to have as long as superheroes are popular. But if you don't subscribe to the idea that you need superpowers to be a superhero, and I don't, the question that remains is, what's the difference between a hero and a superhero? What we're really looking at, assuming the hero in question isn't just simply a vigilante, which we'll be exploring next week with The Punisher, is the difference between a public servant and a legend. Now, a lot of superheroes get the moniker of legend, and so does Zorro. Zorro is a larger-than-life character. He knows he's just a man, but to those who fear him and to those who are saved by him, he's nearly a mythical figure, capable of virtually anything. What makes characters like Zorro, Batman, the Phantom, and the Shadow different from other heroes, such as Indiana Jones or Luke Skywalker, is theatricality, deception, and having an alter ego, a major theme covered in Batman Begins. Even those superheroes who don't have secret identities still wear a costume. They still put on a different persona to inspire others. Superman doesn't wear a mask, but he has a secret identity. Even after everyone knows Tony Stark is Iron Man, he still wears his helmet when he fights crime, still becomes Iron Man. Indy and Luke don't have aliases. They're larger than life too, but what you see is what you get, whereas Zorro and Batman and other crime fighters are symbols. They don't just protect the people, they try to inspire others through their anonymity to do the same. The clothes make the man, as they say, and this film is very aptly titled The Mask of Zorro, as Zorro himself really functions as a concept more than it functions as one single man. I'm going to primarily focus on how the mask functions thematically and symbolically within the movie and the characterization of the heroes based on this created identity of Zorro. Zorro is a caped crusader, just like Batman. Both champion a cause and act as a symbol for their cause. They share a lot of the same physical motifs. Both wear a cape and a mask. Both are theatrical. Both wear black and hide in the shadows until they're ready to reveal themselves. Both are masters of disguise. They each have a calling card. Batman has his bats, and in Batman Begins, it's clear that his batarangs are shaped like bats, so that if someone sees one, they'll know he was there. Zorro's signature, of course, is his Z, which he slashes into whatever he can find. Walls, sheets, and somewhat gruesomely, into the faces of bad guys. While Batman is more about instilling fear in the hearts of his enemies, both want the bad guys to know they're watching them. They both have a signature vehicle of sorts. Batman has his Batmobile, but Zorro is before motor vehicles, so he has his horse Tornado, and they both even operate out of secret caves. But being a masked crime fighter is all about perception, both how the hero sees himself and how others see him. There's a profound difference for both perceptions between these two men. In Batman Begins, Bruce says he wants to become a symbol that is elemental and terrifying. He represents a dark justice. He wants criminals to see him as a monster in the night. But Zorro, as Diego explains to Alejandro, is a hero of the people. Batman is about protecting people as well, but even someone who had done nothing wrong would be afraid of him in a dark alley. Batman is a symbol of fear, while Zorro is a symbol of hope, and that's why in The Dark Knight, when Gotham's symbol of hope, Harvey Dent, is killed, it's so easy for Batman to take the fall. Zorro fights with a dramatic flair in the tradition of Robin Hood. He's valiant, and he fights with a smile on his face. When people can't trust their leaders, Zorro steps in to be the leader they need, someone to set an example and do the right thing. And the two of them are motivated by different factors. The original Zorro in this film, Diego, doesn't have a tragedy in his past that we're told about. He's a Don, and he's successful. He lives a life of luxury, has a beautiful wife and a baby. As far as we can tell, his sole motivation is the good of the people, whereas Batman is motivated by anger, remorse, and in many versions by guilt. He wants to change his city so that it doesn't breed the kinds of criminals like the one who killed his parents. For him, it's personal. For Zorro, it's completely selfless. At least, it is in the beginning. Of course, Zorro's career ends in tragedy, and the next Zorro begins in another tragedy, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So as I said, each of their perceptions of themselves as a hero and as a symbol are quite different. Diego has created a persona that he keeps separate from his own. When he puts the mask on, he becomes a different person, Zorro, and he goes out to inspire people and fight corruption. But when he's at home, he's Don Diego de la Vega. Bruce Wayne completely becomes Batman. As Rachel says at the end of Batman Begins, Bruce's face is his real mask. The man and the symbol are one and the same, and Bruce Wayne is the facade, just a disguise to protect himself and those he cares about. One of the things I found fascinating about this film is that as dangerous as being Zorro could be, Diego still has a family. I really think this is ultimately why Batman can never settle down with a wife, try as he might in various incarnations. If you marry Bruce Wayne, you're really marrying Batman, and Batman is a symbol of relentless justice, desperate to prevent what happened to him as a child from happening to anyone else. Love is not a priority for him. I think it's also very indicative of the personas these men have constructed for themselves, that one has fun, is gallant, and relishes in the adventure, while the other is brooding and all business. The Mask of Zorro is very unusual as a superhero-esque movie in that it has two protagonists. Diego doesn't simply have some background at the beginning and then give his mantle over to Alejandro. They both have clear character arcs that parallel each other. Zorro dies in tragedy, the death of Diego's wife and the loss of his daughter to Raphael, and once Diego escapes prison 20 years later and finds Alejandro, a man who, as a boy, saw Zorro in person and idolized him, he trains Alejandro, and Zorro is now reborn, also out of tragedy. The movie seems to be saying that no one man is Zorro. Zorro is an idea, one that must live on as long as leaders are corrupt and there's no one to champion for the people. 20 years without Zorro is devastating. The people have lost hope, and Raphael has a ridiculous amount of control, to the point where he's scheming to steal enough gold to buy California. Any man with the right training and the right principles can be Zorro. Whoever puts on that mask, be it Diego or Alejandro or anyone else, becomes the gallant hero. They both act nearly identically as Zorro, brave and dashing and confident and charming. It's fascinating to me how easy it is for Alejandro to become who he wants to be, just by looking and feeling the part. Diego says he needs to learn charm so he can go undercover and work his way into Raphael's inner circle. And they both play up how hard this is going to be because he's from such a poor and humble upbringing, and only days earlier he was a thief. But just before this, he steals a horse and calls it Tornado and puts a bandana on his head with slits for eyes in lieu of a mask and hat, and bam, he's Zorro. He has charm and class just because he idolizes Zorro so much he understands him. Zorro has charm. Alejandro still has to learn it for himself. Now let me stop and put this in perspective for a minute. We are seeing this reality from rose-colored glasses to an extent. This isn't a highly realistic world, though there's a historical backdrop of real-world events relating to Mexico and California in the early 1800s, and there are hard decisions for our characters to make and consequences when they fail or make the wrong ones. But this is also a universe of high adventure. Zorro swings around on whatever he can find, he jumps around between horses, he's an expert at swordplay. Just like the Phantom, he seems good at just about everything. We don't know how Diego got so good at everything, but Alejandro gets his training from Diego, and it looks hard. It's not like they fight for a couple hours and poof, he can jump from horse to horse and fence like Errol Flynn. There's a lot of pain involved, like Bruce endured with Ducard in Batman Begins, and in fact, Ducard never cracked a whip at Bruce. But his physical and his social training start from nothing and turn him into an expert in a relatively short amount of time, though the film cleverly brushes over just how long it takes. He goes from saying, the pointy end goes into the other man, to being able to take on several guys at one time. So this isn't highly realistic by any means. But the idea that a man who's the polar opposite from Diego could become Zorro and fool people into thinking he's the same man is intriguing, and it's a really positive message. The first Zorro is rich, but the second is poor, until he gets his act together and becomes a self-made man, and clearly deserves everything he gets by the end. Alejandro starts on the wrong side of the law, and his path to becoming Zorro begins with his brother and fellow thief getting killed by Captain Love. Alejandro's brother is breaking the law, but Captain Love kills him unnecessarily, and that's what makes him the bad guy. Alejandro steals because he's lost and has no guidance. When given the chance to prove himself, he ultimately becomes someone to be admired. At first, it's all about the novelty of wearing the mask and being the hero. After he's trained him, Diego refuses to let Alejandro carry the mantle because his reasons are selfish. He tells him that Zorro isn't a seeker of fame like he is. He has to get his heart in the right place before he's worthy of becoming Zorro. And once he has the heart and the skill, nothing else matters. He is Zorro. The theme of masks is prevalent also with Don Raphael, a power-craving governor who's the best kind of villain because he despises and admires the hero all at the same time. What he hates more than getting beaten by Zorro over and over again at the beginning of the film is not having what Zorro has, especially when he figures out that he and Diego are one and the same. He's in love with Diego's wife and can't have her. Diego is obviously happy, and he's not. The people love Zorro, and they despise him. In short, Raphael wants to be Zorro, but for all the wrong reasons. He He wants the ravishing wife, the beautiful child, and most importantly, the love and adoration of the masses. So when he accidentally kills Diego's wife, he steals Diego's daughter, the only other thing he could take from him that would devastate him. And though he raises her as his own child and she grows up to be, well, Catherine Zeta-Jones, she, just like the citizens he rules over, comes off as cold to him. He still isn't happy, and when the town gathers to hear him give a speech and they give him forced applause, he says, "I know you aren't really happy to see me." Already he knows he's being compared to Zorro. And then someone says it. Zorro stood for the people. Raphael then says, "I stand before you without a mask." But Raphael is wearing a mask, a figurative one of false sincerity. When giving Alejandro social lessons, Diego tells him a nobleman is a man who says one thing and thinks another. So Raphael wants the people to think he's the better man because he doesn't hide behind a mask, but it's just a matter of perception. What does Zorro's mask stand for? Dishonesty? Cowardice? No. Zorro wears a mask not just to avoid reprisals, though there's certainly a practical reason there, but to encourage others to picture themselves standing up for what's right and helping their fellow man. If Diego fought Raphael as Diego, people would be singing the praises of Diego. But doing it anonymously, where no one knows who to thank, and making it look glamorous and exciting, they start dreaming of being Zorro. They start dreaming of making a difference. But Raphael's not exactly a deep thinker. He's not going to think of that. He just wants everything Zorro has without having to earn it. I do like that Raphael is made a little more real by genuinely seeming to care about Elena. He's raised Diego's daughter, and now he can't stand the idea of losing her, just like Diego. He seems to fight his humanity a lot, where we'll see a little glimmer of it, and then he seems to think, no, wait, I want power, so no, I'm not going to do the right thing. He's really cold and nonchalantly decides to kill all the poor workers in the gold mine just to cover up his scheme, so it's not like he's likable or anything, but he does strike me as a more fleshed out person than Captain Love, the one man in the whole movie who doesn't. There's a neat parallel with protégés happening between Raphael and Love and Diego and Alejandro, and I wish Love was fleshed out a little. He does come off as a stereotypical evil soldier guy. I like how we have the same simultaneous passing of the torch of the hero legacy and villain legacy that we had in The Phantom, though. Diego is a very layered character, while the idea of Zorro is simple. When Alejandro talks about getting retribution for his brother's death, Diego says, "Your brother is dead. We lose the ones we love. Put it aside." He's actually coming out and saying, get over it and move on, or you're not fit to put that mask on. Up until the third act, Diego has ignored his feelings about everything that's happened to him. He's seen his grown-up daughter raised by his most hated enemy, and toward the beginning of the film, Alejandro wonders why he doesn't just kill Raphael. Diego just says, the situation is complicated. He cares enough about his daughter to know that killing the man she thinks is her father would be wrong. Keep in mind that it isn't until the last act that Diego gives Alejandro his full support in taking over the mantle of Zorro. So he's still acting like Zorro. No one knows he's alive and he's lost everything. So even without the mask, he's making decisions like Zorro would. But suddenly, he changes his mind in that final act. He decides to go get his daughter, and Alejandro doesn't understand. He's not supposed to go after Captain Love, but Diego can go after Don Raphael. This is all wonderfully subtle, and I appreciate that it's left up to interpretation rather than coming right out and saying it. But here's what I think. At this point in the film, there is one Zorro, Alejandro. Diego has given up the title, and therefore he's given up the code of the hero. Now it's personal for him. He says, I gave them, meaning the people, my life. In return, I lost everything. He still believes there must be a Zorro, but he's given up living that code now. But neither of these men kill their enemies, though both would like to. And there must be some sort of moral balance in this universe, because in the final action scene, when Zorro destroys the mine Raphael is using to steal all that gold to buy California, both Raphael and Captain Love are killed simultaneously. And shortly afterward, Diego dies from his wounds in the fight, but not before he passes his legacy completely to Alejandro. He and Diego's daughter, Elena, have fallen in love, and she's pretty convincingly fallen in love with both Zorro and Alejandro separately. And Diego happily and graciously gives his daughter to Alejandro. He's a father figure, but he's closer to a father-in-law figure, if there is such a thing. A man who has fully embraced this younger man like a son and entrusts him to take care of what he holds most dear. Though, to be fair, Elena seems like she can take care of herself. One of the most interesting things about this movie is how it's bookended. Diego is telling his baby stories about his adventures as Zorro. And then at the end, Alejandro and Elena have gotten married and had a baby too. And Alejandro's doing the same thing. I have to wonder if this is a vicious cycle that will never end. Will an enemy of Alejandro's take his family away from him too? What makes him a really sympathetic protagonist, besides the way he grows as a person and chooses responsibility over revenge, is that he's willing to take this risk, as is his wife, just like Diego and his wife were. Perhaps they'll find themselves in the same danger Diego did, but rather than denying themselves a happy life together, as many superheroes do who are worried about their loved ones getting hurt, they understand that Zorro is important, and that if something tragic does happen, it's better to make that sacrifice and give the people some hope. For a moment, when Diego goes after Raphael, it seems like maybe he's turned his back on everything he believes in. Alejandro says, "What about the people?" And Diego responds with, "They'll still have Zorro." The Mask of Zorro is a visually stunning film. The landscapes are gorgeous and memorable, and it takes its time and really allows the viewer to take in the atmosphere and culture. The music enhances the ambiance as well, with a lot of beautiful Spanish guitar cues that don't come off as too obvious or cliché. The fight choreography is reminiscent of the early Zorro silent films, with a lot of big gesturing that doesn't come off as silly, but it's just in character for Zorro. He talks with his hands and doesn't say a lot when he's in costume. He's putting on a show. And even with a lot of heavy themes about identity, family, legacy, and loss, there's a lot of humor, both in the dialogue and in the action. There's some slapstick that really works. It seems like it's okay for us to laugh at Zorro in costume in a way we can't laugh at anything else. Again, he's putting on a show. Both men wearing the mask are nearly vaudevillian about it. One example is when he's trying to get the horse to move under him so he can jump down on it from on top of a building, and when he finally gets it to go where he wants, he plummets to the ground when the horse moves out of his way. The humor in the dialogue is often witty and understated, like when Raphael is going through the prisoners looking for Zorro, and everyone there claims they're Zorro. One of the first to speak up is an elderly black man, and one of the others says, "Anyone can see you're too tall." It goes without saying that the casting is phenomenal, and I'm especially impressed with how Catherine Zeta-Jones has such perfect chemistry with both Anthony Hopkins and Antonio Banderas. The romance is, for the most part, understated and classy, though I despise the scene where Alejandro, as Zorro, cuts her dress up so she's topless. It's gratuitous and really feels like it's just there to have something kinky to put in the trailer, and if you don't believe me, watch the trailer. There's a genuine spark between her and Alejandro, both in and out of costume, and she has some wonderfully tender moments with Diego before she realizes he's her real father. Hopkins' Diego is layered and mysterious. We don't know much about his background before he's put in prison, and yet he's probably the most well-rounded of the two protagonists. Whereas Banderas plays Alejandro as an understandably simple guy who matures into a complex and wiser man. There's a lot of sincerity in this film. We understand why these guys feel the need to put on a mask, and they're both very real. When they feel pain or loss or joy, so does the audience. Now, it's not a perfect film. There are some places in the middle where I feel it drags, mostly because we spend more time with Raphael and Love than we really need to. The first half is very well paced, and then it loses a little momentum before we get to the climax. And even in this highly romanticized reality, there are some places where the plot stretches credibility by having things happen too conveniently. For instance, Diego finds Alejandro just after he gets out of prison, and he just happens to have his medallion out, which Diego recognizes from his days as Zorro. This seems too easy. If he hadn't had it out at that very moment, Diego would have walked on by, and we wouldn't have much of a movie. I'm going to give Mask of Zorro a 3.5 out of 4. It's a really fun movie with a great sense of adventure, but it's also very smart, with characters that feel real and a lot of big ideas to think about.